Everyone remembers the heroes. But the villains? They're the reason we keep coming back. Some were adapted so perfectly they became better than their comic book counterparts. Others were stripped of everything that made them legendary. Today, we're ranking 15 MCU television villains, from the biggest disappointments to the absolute greatest adaptations ever brought to the small screen. We're not judging these characters by how powerful they are. That's not what adaptation means. We're measuring how faithfully, or how intelligently, Marvel translated them from the page to the screen. Sometimes that means staying loyal to every panel. Sometimes that means reinventing everything. Because here's the thing about comic book adaptations. The best ones don't copy. They understand. Get comfortable, because we're counting down each villain adaptation and scoring them from 1 to 10. Only the most faithful, iconic, and unforgettable performances will earn a perfect 10. Can you guess who's taking the number 1 spot? I promise, the biggest surprise is still waiting. Let's go. Number 15. Typhoid Mary, Iron Fist. Adaptation score? 4 out of 10. One of Marvel's most psychologically fascinating assassins. In the comics, Mary Walker suffers from dissociative identity disorder. Multiple personalities, each with different skills, different memories, different dangerous tendencies. She's an assassin, a survivor, a woman at war with herself. The television version? It hinted at that complexity. The camera caught something in her eyes. Alice Eve clearly understood the assignment, but the writing never caught up. Instead of becoming one of Marvel's darkest, most unpredictable antiheroes, she became another supporting character whose story simply stopped. No resolution, no evolution, no payoff. A fascinating performance trapped inside a script that was too afraid to commit. Number 14. Diamondback, Luke Cage. Adaptation score? 4 out of 10. This one hurts, because Diamondback should have worked. In the comics, Willis Stryker is Luke Cage's childhood friend turned bitter enemy, a street-level crime lord whose hatred is deeply, painfully personal. He's not a supervillain. He's a betrayed friend with resources, intelligence, and a grudge that's been festering for decades. The show gave us power armor. Instead of grounded, intimate revenge, we got over-the-top monologues. Instead of raw, believable menace, we got comic book cliché. The speeches felt like they were written for a different show entirely. The unpredictability that made comic Diamondback terrifying was replaced by something cartoonish. Here's what makes this adaptation uniquely frustrating. It came after Cottonmouth, and Cottonmouth was working. Stay for number 12, where a villain forces us to question what adaptation actually means. Number 13. Cottonmouth, Luke Cage. Adaptation score? 5 out of 10. Here's the twist. Cottonmouth himself wasn't bad. In fact, many fans thought he was incredible. Mahershala Ali brought gravitas, menace, and surprising vulnerability to Cornell Stokes. Every scene crackled. The problem? Marvel removed him far too early. Just as audiences became invested, just as the character was developing real psychological depth, he disappeared. His comic counterpart survives much longer, becomes a major criminal power, builds an empire that spans multiple storylines. The adaptation started brilliantly, then cut itself short. This is a different kind of adaptation failure. Not a failure of writing or performance, a failure of pacing, of not understanding what you have until it's already gone. We're entering a run of villains Marvel actually understood. But number 11? This one divided the fan base completely. Number 12. Arthur Harrow, Moon Knight. Adaptation score, 6 out of 10. This is fascinating. Comic readers barely knew Harrow. He appeared in a single issue, a mad scientist experimenting on human pain thresholds. That's it. One obscure footnote in Marvel history. Marvel completely reinvented him. Instead of adapting the original, they created something entirely new. A soft-spoken cult leader whose calm certainty was far more unsettling than any laboratory rant could ever be. Ethan Hawke brought a quiet, almost holy menace to every line. The glass in his sandals, the measured cadence, the absolute conviction. Not comic accurate at all, but undeniably compelling. Number 12 raises an important question. If the source material is thin, does reinvention count as adaptation? Or is it just good original writing wearing a familiar name? Number 11 is why we separated the versions. Number 11. Kingpin, Hawkeye version, the complication. Adaptation score, 6 out of 10. Yes, we're separating the versions, because this adaptation earned its own conversation, and it's more complicated than most fans want to admit. Vincent D'Onofrio's return as Wilson Fisk should have been a triumph. And in moments it was. That voice, that physicality, the way he fills a room just by existing in it. But something was off. The Hawaiian shirt, the comedic beats, the sudden explosion of strength that felt more video game than visceral. Many viewers felt he was less intimidating, strangely vulnerable in ways that didn't feel intentional. Compare this to the man who decapitated a rival with a car door in Daredevil Season 1, and something had clearly shifted. But let's pause for a second. Because here's the thing about Kingpin that the backlash missed entirely. In the comics, Wilson Fisk has existed in multiple tones. He's been the grounded crime lord of Frank Miller's Daredevil. He's also shown up in broader, more theatrical Marvel stories. The Hawaiian shirt Fisk, the man on vacation, the crime lord who occasionally operates in a world slightly more colorful than the blood-soaked Hell's Kitchen he typically inhabits. The Hawkeye version was accurate to a different part of the source material. The problem wasn't that Marvel got Fisk wrong. It's that audiences had already fallen in love with a specific version, and seeing him in a different register felt like betrayal. This is the adaptation conversation nobody wants to have. Sometimes being faithful to the source material means producing something your audience isn't ready for. A 6 out of 10, not because the performance failed, but because it asked fans to accept a version of Fisk they had already decided they didn't want. The good news? Marvel recognized the mismatch. They've been restoring the Fisk fans fell in love with. Number 10 was never supposed to be a villain at all. Number 10. John Walker / U.S. Agent, The Falcon and the Winter Soldier. Adaptation score, 6 out of 10. Here's what I find most fascinating about John Walker. He wasn't a villain in the traditional sense. He was a hero who cracked under the weight of a legacy he was never meant to carry. In the comics, John Walker was always designed to be the wrong Captain America, the replacement who proved why Steve Rogers was irreplaceable. A decorated soldier whose methods were too brutal, whose temperament was too volatile, whose understanding of the shield began and ended with "hit them harder." Wyatt Russell's adaptation understood something crucial about this character that even some comic runs missed. Walker wasn't evil. He was inadequate, and he knew it. Every scene communicated the same quiet desperation. A man trying to fill shoes that were always going to crush him. The pressure mounting behind his eyes. The way his confidence curdled into something ugly every time someone reminded him he wasn't Steve. And then, the shield scene. Publicly executing a man with Captain America's shield while a crowd filmed on their phones. That moment became instant television history. Not because it was shocking, because it was inevitable. The adaptation had built toward it so carefully that when it happened, you realized you'd been watching a tragedy unfold in slow motion. Where some adaptations lose the comic character's soul, John Walker's adaptation found it. The insecurity, the pressure, the terrifying gap between who he wanted to be and who he actually was. Not the most faithful adaptation on this list, but one of the most psychologically honest. Number 9 is the loose thread Marvel never tied. Number 9, Madame Gao, Daredevil / Iron Fist / The Defenders. Adaptation score, 6 out of 10. Marvel's Netflix universe had a quiet secret threading through all 4 series. A diminutive, elderly woman who ran heroin through Hell's Kitchen and could send a fully grown man flying across a room with a single open palm strike. Madame Gao was never officially adapted from the single comic character. She was an original creation, loosely inspired by Crane Mother, the ruler of Kunzi, one of the 7 capital cities of heaven from the immortal Iron Fist comics. But where Crane Mother was a grandiose interdimensional monarch, Gao was something subtler, a crime lord who operated entirely in the shadows, spoke in riddles, and seemed to know far more than she ever revealed. The adaptation was strongest when it leaned into mystery. In Daredevil Season 1, she was genuinely unsettling, the only villain even Wilson Fisk seemed to defer to. The steel factory where blind workers handled heroin, the cryptic warnings delivered in perfect, measured calm, the way she never raised her voice and yet commanded absolute obedience. But here's where the adaptation stalled. Marvel never paid any of it off. The Defenders hinted at her connection to Kunlun. Iron Fist teased her deeper nature, but the explanations never arrived. She remained a question mark, a fascinating question mark, but ultimately a loose thread the writers never tied. A magnetic presence who deserved the backstory they never delivered. Number 8. Agatha Harkness, WandaVision. Adaptation score, 7 out of 10. Nobody expected Agatha Harkness to become a cultural phenomenon. In the comics, she's an elderly mentor figure, Wanda's guide through the complexities of magic. Wise, maternal, centuries old but grandmotherly in presentation. Marvel threw all of that out. Instead, Kathryn Hahn gave us a manipulative, scene-devouring witch overflowing with personality. The nose wiggle reveal, the theme song that broke the internet, the way she turned every conversation into a trap you didn't realize you'd walked into until she was already smiling. It was Agatha all along. That single line became instant internet history. Different from the comics? Absolutely. More successful than a faithful adaptation would have been? Without question. Number 7 took patience. Lots of it. And the payoff was extraordinary. Number 7. Bushmaster, Luke Cage Season 2. Adaptation score, 7 out of 10. Perhaps the biggest surprise on this entire list. Comic Bushmaster is a relatively straightforward antagonist, a crime lord seeking power. Functional but unremarkable. The kind of villain that fills pages without leaving scars. The television version? Something entirely different. Mustafa Shakir's John McIver wasn't just physically intimidating, though watching him take hit after hit without flinching was genuinely unsettling. He had understandable motivations: family tragedy, generational revenge, a warped sense of justice that made audiences question, scene by scene, who the real villain actually was. Every confrontation with Luke Cage became a philosophical debate as much as a physical battle. The nightshade-enhanced ferocity, the sing-song Jamaican patois slipping into monologues, the way he made you almost root for him. That's outstanding adaptation. Taking functional source material and building something memorable on top of it. Number 6. Frank Castle / The Punisher, Daredevil Season 2. Adaptation score, 8 out of 10. Depending on your perspective, Frank Castle can absolutely function as the antagonist. And when viewed through Daredevil's eyes, through Matt Murdock's unwavering moral code, he becomes the perfect ideological villain. Jon Bernthal didn't just play the Punisher. He became the Punisher in a way that redefined the character for an entire generation. The graveyard monologue, the raw, unprocessed grief behind every violent act, the way his voice cracked when he talked about his daughter. And here's what makes this adaptation brilliant. Marvel understood that the Punisher isn't simply a killing machine. He's a man whose soul was destroyed, who found purpose in the one thing he had left: punishment. The show didn't glorify the violence. It showed you the cost. Bernthal captured every ounce of pain, every ounce of rage, and every broken ounce of humanity. We're entering elite territory. Every remaining villain changed Marvel television forever. But number 5? Marvel didn't give us the finished product. They showed us the monster being made. Number 5, Bullseye, Daredevil Season 3. Adaptation score, 8 out of 10. This adaptation took patience. In the comics, Bullseye arrives fully formed, a psychopathic assassin who never misses, whose backstory is treated as almost irrelevant. He's a force of nature, a weapon with a heartbeat. The television version made a much smarter choice. Instead of giving audiences the completed assassin immediately, Marvel showed us Benjamin Poindexter, the unstable, obsessive FBI agent, and then, over an entire season, showed us the monster being created. Every manipulation by Fisk, every cracked boundary, every moment where Dex could have pulled back and chose not to. Wilson Bethel's performance was surgical. The way he mirrored body language, the flat affect that occasionally cracked to reveal something terrifying underneath. The Office Massacre, executed with office supplies, filmed in a single unbroken shot. One of the smartest villain origin stories in comic book television history. Only 4 remain, and these adaptations set the gold standard. But number 4? You probably forgot how good this was. Number 4, Grant Ward, Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. Adaptation score, 9 out of 10. Let's pause for a second. Grant Ward wasn't pulled from a single comic book source. He was an original creation, loosely inspired by various S.H.I.E.L.D. traitor storylines, but fundamentally a television invention. So why is he ranked this high? Because here's the thing about adaptation that most people get wrong. It's not just about translating existing characters. It's about understanding the universe well enough to create something that belongs in it. Ward's betrayal in Season 1 remains one of the greatest twists in comic book television. The clean-cut specialist, the loyal soldier, the man Daisy trusted with her life. And then, take the shot. Brett Dalton played 3 distinct versions of this man across the series. Loyal agent, Hydra, true believer, and finally, something far more complicated. The Framework arc, where a simulated version of Ward became the hero he might have been, is genuinely brilliant character work. An original creation that felt like it had always been part of the Marvel DNA. Number 3, Kilgrave, Jessica Jones Season 1. Adaptation score, 9 out of 10. This is adaptation done right. The Purple Man from the comics could have looked ridiculous. A purple-skinned villain with mind control powers who spends decades tormenting heroes. On the page, he works because comic art sells the unreality. On screen, without careful handling, he becomes a joke. Marvel understood the assignment. They grounded his powers, made them invisible, made them believable. And in doing so, made him infinitely more terrifying than any purple-skinned comic panel could manage. David Tennant transformed mind control into pure horror. Kilgrave doesn't have to fight you. He doesn't have to threaten you. He just has to speak, and suddenly you're doing things you would never do, saying things you would never say, becoming someone you don't recognize. His greatest weapon wasn't superpowers, it was manipulation. His ability to find the wound and press. The way he made Jessica question whether she had ever truly escaped him, even when he wasn't in the room. Audiences hated him because they believed him. That's the highest compliment a villain adaptation can receive. Number 2 took a character audiences thought they fully understood and revealed layers they never knew existed. Number 2, Loki. Loki series, adaptation score, 9 out of 10. Marvel had already perfected Loki in film. Tom Hiddleston spent a decade building the god of mischief into one of the most beloved characters in the entire MCU. The television series could have coasted on that goodwill. It didn't. Instead, Loki did something remarkable. It took a character audiences thought they fully understood and revealed layers they never knew existed. The insecurities beneath the arrogance, the desperate need for purpose beneath the chaos, the identity crisis of a being who has spent his entire existence performing a role someone else wrote for him. I just want you to be okay. That line, delivered by a variant of himself, broke something open. Because Loki had never, in 1,000 years of existence, been told that by anyone, including himself. The series expanded him beautifully. Rather than reinventing Loki, it deepened him. His relationship with Mobius, a bureaucrat who saw through every mask. His confrontation with He Who Remains, a villain who made Loki look like an amateur. The final, heartbreaking choice at the end of time, sacrificing everything, not for glory, but because it was the right thing to do. Few adaptations evolve a character this naturally, taking decades of established history and somehow making him feel new again. The god of mischief became the god of stories, and it felt earned. Stay for number 1, because it's not just the greatest MCU television villain adaptation, it's the standard by which every future adaptation will be measured. Number 1, Wilson Fisk / Kingpin, Daredevil, Netflix. Adaptation score, 10 out of 10. Marvel has adapted hundreds of villains. None reached this level. Vincent D'Onofrio didn't simply play Wilson Fisk. He became him. Every whisper, every terrifying explosion of violence, every heartbreaking moment of insecurity. Here's what makes this the definitive adaptation. Fisk wasn't simply evil. He was human. A man who genuinely believed he was saving Hell's Kitchen and was willing to drown it in blood to prove it. Lonely, broken, brutal, sophisticated. A child trapped in a monster's body who never learned any way to express love except through violence. The car door scene, the "I'm not the villain" speech, the way his voice drops to a near whisper right before he destroys someone. The tender, awkward romance with Vanessa, somehow making you feel for a man who just killed someone with his bare hands. Everything that made Kingpin legendary in the comics survived the transition to television and somehow became even richer. The white suit, the operatic scale of his ambition, the way he rebuilds himself from nothing again and again because surrender is simply not in his vocabulary. Years after his debut, fans still compare every new Marvel villain to him. That's what greatness looks like. And here's what I find most fascinating. The Daredevil adaptation understood something fundamental about Wilson Fisk that even some comic runs missed. He's not scary because he's strong. He's scary because he's right. At least right enough that you question whether Matt Murdock is actually the hero of this story. The greatest adaptations don't simply recreate comic panels. They capture what made readers fall in love with these characters in the first place. Sometimes that means staying faithful. Sometimes it means changing everything, as long as the soul remains intact. Now it's your turn. Which MCU television villain deserved a higher ranking? Who do you think Marvel completely ruined? Drop a comment. I read every single one. And if you're new here, this is what Villainologist does. We go deeper. Subscribe because we're just getting started. Every great hero is remembered, but every legendary story begins with an unforgettable villain.